It's Wednesday, December 21st. This morning I'm beginning to question the true function of the Supreme Court. And I'm raising this question because they have taken action against President Biden's decision to stop Title 42. Now, Title 42 is not really a law, it's an act of some kind. And so it's the thing that was used. It's the reason that was given many times for clearing out a large percentage of people from our border. Under health considerations, they were using health and the pandemic as an excuse to send people home from the border. And Biden has chosen to stop that, actually, as of today. But several southern states appealed to the Supreme Court to stop Biden's action because they don't want immigrants allowed in this country. Or maybe not all immigrants, but the volume of immigrants has many southern states upset. And we know what's been going on with immigration and the border at Texas, and even our good friend DeSantis in Florida, where they're shipping people by bus around the country. And so the Supreme Court is stepping in. And I am wondering in my mind if the Supreme Court is not overstepping their authority. Now, the role of the Supreme Court is to interpret the law and determine the constitutionality of the law and apply that to individual cases. But the Constitution is a document that is not clearly stating everything that goes on in this country. And that is the problem that we have between the Supreme Court, the Constitution, and the rest of the government. The Supreme Court is the sole authority on interpretation of the law, the final authority on interpretation of the law. Now, they don't even have to take a case if they don't want to. If they take a look at it and said the case is not a valid case, there's no reason for us to get involved, that's the end of it. But when they have the authority to look at it, and then they can make a decision based upon their interpretation of the law, which quite often varies greatly from the interpretation of a given sentence by the rest of the public. And we've seen what's happened in recent times. They've overturned abortion. They neglect and defend the right to carry a weapon. So a gun, specifically a gun. So I ask myself, why? Why do they get involved in something like Title 42? It seems to me that this Supreme Court is trying to be the most powerful force in our government. They seem to be wanting the power ahead of Congress, ahead of the Senate, ahead of the president. We have this three-tier government: the president, the government, and the courts. And it seems to me that the Supreme Court is trying to take over being number one because they interpret the Constitution the way they see fit, not necessarily in the best interests of the country. See, the Constitution is written in a way that there's no very clear statement on a lot of different issues. And so it's subject to interpretation. And if we have a group of people sitting on the Supreme Court who are interpreting this Constitution against the values of many in this nation, that is not a good thing. That is definitely not a good thing when they are the sole interpreter. They can say that a well-regulated militia means that everybody can carry a gun. And there's nothing in the Constitution that states anything about abortions and when life begins. Those are principles that each individual decides for himself. Religion is not a factor in our lives at all. It should be totally ignored when looking at the law. Yet I don't believe that's really the case. I don't believe that the Supreme Court is acting in the best interests of this country. And maybe Joe Biden's decision to revoke Title 42 is in the best interest of this country. But he's the president. And he shouldn't be challenged by a bunch of states that don't want immigrants coming across our borders in the volumes that they are up here. And immigration is a major, major problem. And maybe it would help if the Supreme Court had some ideas about how to fix that problem and not to rule one way or the other on the use of Title 42 or something else. And maybe the complaining states would have some ideas about what to do, instead of just trying to shut the border down. Recognize the fact that there are desperate people in this world, and they're going to do desperate things, and we have to rise to that occasion. Let's look at this like it's a war. Immigration is a war. It's not a peacetime activity anymore. This is like an invasion, and we got to be ready for it. And we have to have a peaceful solution that can exist all around the country. Now, I know there are people in this country who are terrified of the immigrants. Not because they're physically afraid, but because they represent a challenge to their lifestyles, perhaps. Because an immigrant might be taking a job that some American citizen would like to have. But let's look at this thing realistically. If these people can do the job, and they can do jobs that many Americans don't want to do, then why don't we have a system to get them into the country peacefully and quietly and let everybody go about their business, instead of having to use a weapon like Title 42. If you look at this thing, Title 42 is nothing more than a weapon. It was used to keep people out of the country on false pretenses, and that's not the American way. We should be a welcoming country and a lot better than we are. But we are so disoriented, so disorganized, so hatred-filled that we can't get anything done. So I leave you with those crazy thoughts this morning, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.